There's quite an argument going on in our world today in regard to transgenderism. And I'd like to share some of my thoughts and read to you a little bit from a book that gives us some really good information and some real perspective on this issue. So first of all, we have a dichotomous argument here, as we usually do. So on what we call the left, we have the argument that children and adolescents and adults should be affirmed in their gender confusion, and they should be affirmed in their desire to possibly try to change their gender to their preferred gender. We've got the rainbow flag being flown in our schools, and we have this attitude of acceptance and even admiration for people who are brave enough to face down their own gender confusion. Okay, so we have this attitude of acceptance, of affirmation on the left. On the right hand side, we have an argument that the reason that we have this confusion in our world is because there's not prayer in schools, and that we don't have a strong Christian country, and that we're not encouraging our children to pray to Jesus so that they don't have these confusions and that they understand how life really works. So these are, in a nutshell, and I may not have described those perfectly, but in a nutshell, those are kind of the two opposing viewpoints. I'd like to offer a third. So from the perspective of reincarnation, we have a situation here where we are not aware of what we were doing in our past lives and what our circumstances were, whether or not we were male or female, what the environment that we grew up in was like. We don't seem to know anything about our past lives, most of us, and therefore we don't understand why sometimes, especially during adolescence and maybe even childhood, that we may not feel comfortable in our bodies. Is it prayer in school that we need, or is it the teachings of reincarnation, even just taught as a possibility, a scientific possibility that we have been here before, many, many times possibly before? So I'd like to read to you from the book called Kundalini Self Tantric. This is a book by Michael Beloved, and there's a section in here in chapter 14 where this author deals directly with gender confusion. It's on page 215 down toward the bottom of the page. We'll start. Gender discontent. Actually, I'm going to start the section right above this one, still on page 215, called Transmigration is Bewildering, because this sets us up to understand why the confusion is there to begin with, because of our lack of awareness of our past lives and of reincarnation at all. Transmigration is bewildering. Transmigrations, even within the same species, even within the same family, is a complex set of abstract movements which are bewildering to the core self. Who's the core self? The core self is the observing self, the spirit, the soul, the eternal person that is inside of your body, inside of your head specifically right now. And when your body dies, that core self travels along with your subtle body into the astral realm, and then it will be born again in that subtle body into another physical body. This is what transmigration is. And that core self, you, the I am consciousness, the actual you, the spiritual person, travels along through this transmigration process from one body to another, from one dimension to another. So let me continue. It's bewildering to the core self. The core self is the spiritual self, but it's not some magically intelligent being. It's bewildered. It doesn't understand this process, actually, until it evolves enough to come into this knowledge and to understand it and to integrate it. The psychic material nature makes these movements, the psychic material nature, this physical realm and the psychic realm that operates through it. The psychic material nature makes these movements, and the core self is subjected to them irrespective of if it wants to be traumatized. Remember, as Buddha the great yogi Buddha said that the first of the noble truths is that life is suffering, existence is trauma. And the core self is subjected to this trauma whether it wants to be or not. Some phases of the operation are done within the observing ability of the self, but much of it is so abstract as to be non-actions to the self because of the self's inability to comprehend subconscious and unconscious movements. So you as the spiritual self, you don't understand your subconscious or unconscious things, abstract things, any more than your basic conscious awake mind. Even if the person moves from one body in one human family to another body as a relative of the same family, the core self is unable to track every movement. You can't remember. Instead, it shifts involuntarily from stage to stage, some conscious, some unconscious, and some subconscious. These psychic movements, which are followed by physical changes, occur with or without the core self's cooperation, with or without the core self's cooperation. It is ludicrous that religious and social leaders project the idea the person's self can, in one life, change his abstract nature, his unconscious and subconscious motivation, by a simplistic religious formula which is nothing but a cosmetic treatment. It would require deep meditation over many lives before a yogi can even conceive of the powers which motivate the self's behaviors. What to speak of eliminating such energies, much of which is not visible to the self. For self-tantric, one must move aside from religious oversimplification and tackle this bewildering and knotty complex head-on. So that's what the right does. It oversimplifies things. They claim, oh, if we just had prayer in schools, oh, if people would just accept Jesus into their hearts, everything would be fine. We know that that is not true. That's an oversimplification. So here we are to gender discontent. A person who is dissatisfied with the gender of his or her body, who feels that he or she should be the opposite sex or should be of a neutral, like non-binary, orientation, may have a valid grievance or be mistaken. In that case, when investigating self-gender, one should consider these aspects. 1. The gender of the isolated core self. Can you even determine or fathom the gender of your spiritual self? 2. Acquired subtle gender configuration while transmigrating. So this means the gender of your subtle body, the body that goes into your dream world, the body that after your physical body dies will be in the astral world, your energy body, your astral body. And 3, the biological gender of the present body, which is a lot easier to determine. The gender of the isolated core self, the spiritual self, is the most abstract realization which the yogi could determine. At first, he will not figure this because it is too subtle to know. You won't even consider this. Most people don't even consider this. He would have to objectivize the adjuncts, like the sense of identity. So the adjuncts are the tools that operate in your head, your intellect, your sense of identity, and your Kundalini life force. Of these, the most subtle is the sense of identity. Western psychology would call this the ego. It takes many lives of meditation for a yogi to achieve the required subtlety to read into the abstract parts of his psychic nature. The subtle gender configuration the yogi currently has is the state of his subtle body's sexual orientation. Your energy body's sexual orientation. This is a complexity which shows as a male, female, neutral, or androgynous being based on many bewildering formats from countless past lives. Modern astronomers estimate this universe to be about 13 billion years in the making. Assuming that the subtle body was existing since the beginning of this cosmic time, The amount of lives oneself used would be countless. It could mean that any gender configuration which the subtle body expresses is actually a complexity, even though it appears or feels as a something as simple as male, female, neutral, or androgynous. The task of sorting this is tremendous. One would have to be a super yogi, a siddha perfected being, to clarify this. The biological gender of the present body is to an extent obvious. However, there are cases where infants are born with male and female organs or the absence of either, not very often. But why does this happen? If I am born with a male body and feel myself to be a female or neutral, how do I reconcile that? Should I live and function as a male even though it is contrary to my feelings? Before the modern era, many persons did just that. They were circumstantially forced to do so because of pressing social mores, which were enforced even by a threat of death. But what would be done by a self-tantric yogi to solve his dilemma if indeed he was born with a male body but felt female? In that case, he would begin the investigation with the clear-cut, very obvious factor, which is the male body. He should try to get a clear-cut definition of what that male body is in regards to what material nature intended for it to be. This reminds me of the Matt Walsh work, What is a Woman? It's important that we do define these things, in fact. For this investigation, he may have to function as a male in a heterosexual or homosexual relationship according to his orientation and by whatever opportunities he finds himself to be in. Viewing the experiences objectively, not trying to enjoy them, allowing the pleasure in them to happen without craving these, he should study the function of his body and how nature uses it. Being satisfied to see what the male body is capable of, he should form conclusions about the advantages and disadvantages of that gender. With this information, he should move inwards to investigate the more complex issue, which is the gender configuration he acquired in many previous births. While transmigrating, one may gain a result which is quite different to what one experiences most of the time. One who has a certain gender of subtle body may have had the opposite gender in the past life. We cannot assume that a certain gender of the subtle body means that during the transmigrations that person always had that same sexual orientation. The research into the gender orientation of the subtle body takes years of meditation sensitivity to determine how the person assumed the present body on the basis of a series of similar or dissimilar subtle body orientations. So even if your subtle body, let's say, is male, and let's say that you were male in your past 5 lives, and then by some circumstance, nature puts you into the physical body of a female, you're likely to have gender confusion. And that's okay. We are going to experience, certain entities are going to experience, and maybe even most of us at some point in our transmigration through these bodies will experience gender confusion. Because as we can see, nature isn't always consistent. We can always depend on nature to throw a monkey wrench into things. So we've got a section here on changing of gender in the same body. Modern medical techniques allow someone to change the gender of the body. Surgeons can remove a male organ and design apparent female entry instead. It doesn't work very well, but they try. Female entry points can be sealed and apparent male appendages added. As medical science advances, this may become more commonplace. The use of hormone therapy allows persons whose bodies are male to feel female, at least for a little bit of time, maybe. This provides relief for persons who report that their psychology is female, which makes the male body contrary to their emotional states. Those whose bodies are female and who have male moods may use hormone therapy to switch their female body feelings to that of a male. So, isn't it understandable, based on the concept of reincarnation, that gender identity is normal? But does that mean that you should mutilate your sex organs, or that you should manipulate your endocrine system through the use of the opposite hormone? Is that a good idea? What's that going to do in terms of your next incarnation? How is that going to influence your next body? So if we could teach children, instead of oversimplification, like we just need prayer in schools and we need Jesus, or the exploitation of children and their understandable confusion by promoting affirmation of their confusion, why not teach them about their subtle body, about transmigration, about reincarnation? Why not make it a class on philosophy in the school system? If we're going to take this on, if we as a human race have gone so far through the evolutionary process of transmigration, that so many of us have transmigrated so many times, that we're coming to the point of colossal gender confusion, even though, yes, this is an ideology, yes, this is an agenda, yes, I understand transhumanism and what the powers that be are trying to do to us, and the ruination of the family, the ruination of what we understand to be male and female and our God-given attributes. What if we taught our adolescents and youth that it's okay to feel these things and to embrace it, and that you will have another body, and that maybe you should consider what you need to do in this life, in this gender-confused life, what needs to be done to ensure that you get into the right body the next time, and that you carry that knowledge, that subtle, subconscious knowledge with you into the next life, so the next life after that, you will continue to be the gender that you truly are. Because according to this, and according to our highest spiritual texts, there's always two genders, really. There's always the male and the female. And even the core self, the spiritual I am consciousness, is a male or a female. Even though we can have bodies through our transmigration, through our reincarnations, that are the opposite of what we are. And it's just another experience. And that's what this creation is about. It's about experience. Patanjali says that in the Yoga Sutras. What are we here for? We're here for experience. And it's not the same experience over and over again. It's variations of experience. So instead of mutilating the bodies, instead of affirming one's gender confusion through the use of manipulative drugs and surgical processes, why not affirm the confusion, affirm all of our confusions over who we are through the teachings of the concept of reincarnation? So those are my initial thoughts. I'm going to read in another couple of videos some chapters of this book called Sex You. This is another book by the yogi Michael Beloved. Today I read from Kundalini Self Tantric. These are available on Amazon. And I'm going to do another video very soon from Sex You. This is all about the mechanics of reincarnation. They're totally non-religious. It's all based in psychic science. So thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them down below in the comments. Thanks.